Let's go back to 1946. Martha Graham's Dark Meadow premiered in January of that year. And unlike the other works of that era, which were based on specific Greek stories, Dark Meadow is a very abstract work. The three lead characters are named She Who Seeks, that was Martha's role, He Who Summons, that was the role of Martha's lover, Eric Hawkins, and She of the Ground, the Mae O'Donnell role. And there are also a chorus of 9 dancers named They Who Dance Together. In her original program note, Martha wrote, "Dark Meadow is a reenactment of the mysteries which attend the eternal adventure of seeking." We do know about some of the things that possibly inspired Martha because the world-renowned dance journalist Deborah Jowett has written, "When Graham made Dark Meadow, she was pondering the archetypes of which Carl Jung wrote, as well as taking notes on Francis Cornford's From Religion to Philosophy, a study in the origins of Western speculation." Cornford, writing of the Greek philosopher Empedocles, says, "The soul is conceived as falling from the region of light into the roofed-in cave, the dark meadow of Ate," the personification of recklessness, sin, guilt, right up Martha's alley. Now, upon its premiere, the reaction to Dark Meadow varied widely. John Martin, the critic for the New York Times, called it thoroughly fascinating, however bewildering, and predicted that it was going to be a slight work. Agnes de Mille attended. She was with the psychoanalyst Florence Powdermaker, who, according to Agnes, sat at the end with tears streaming down her face, saying, the suffering, this is not the price. Is there no one who can teach Martha this?" In a review of a 1999 revival, Times critic Anna Kisselgoff wrote, "To borrow a line from former Senator Dale Bumpers, it's about sex." But I believe Martha, in using these archetypes, intended the dance to be open to very personal and diverse interpretations. And fortunately, tonight, we have an expert on these early days of Dark Meadow with us. The dance premiered in 1946, and Stuart Hodes joined the Martha Graham Dance Company in 1947. It was one of the first Graham dances he performed. He stayed with the company until 1958, dancing many lead roles and partnering Martha Graham. Went on to an illustrious career as a choreographer, educator, administrator, performer, always coming back to mentor the Graham legacy, and it's always my pleasure to be with Stuart and to introduce him to you tonight. Stuart Hodes. Have a seat, Stuart. I'm just going to turn this mic over to you and say, what are a couple of your favorite memories of learning Dark Meadow, observing Martha dancing Dark Meadow? Any theories about what the dance means? Things like that.
Well, it just happens it's one of my favorite dances, and I've missed it. Because I haven't seen it except this evening and in some of the movies. And I could no more give you some brilliant insight than anybody that's ever talked about it, because I think it's very, to me I didn't even know what I was doing when I started it. And I did love it. I loved the moves. And I think that final quote, it's about sex, let's face it, you know. And I know she has a section, which I'd have to look up. I will look it up on the internet. The last section was called The Ecstasy of the Flowering Branch. And at the very end of the dance, there's a whole bunch of phallic symbols, and one is right in the middle, and it's the tallest. And at the very end, I thought of them as semaphores, like on a train. They all come up and they're green. And it's such an understatement for... Go ahead, say it.
Sex.
The climax, say. And yet, it's perfect. It's perfect.
He's referring to the set by Isamu Noguchi that you may have noticed in the film, which is full of phallic symbols all over the stage, and towards the end of the ballet, one of them flowers. Right?
Yeah, and yeah, you know, she gives it such a broader meaning that makes it more like sex, because sex transcends itself, I think. And the dance transcends any of these quickie, smart characterizations that critics, the present critic accepted, like to make. And I don't think it matters what you say about Dark Meadow, unless you react to it very negatively. I don't know critics who do that. Although I know that Martha's agents were trying to always say, do we have to do Dark Meadow? They somehow thought it didn't work on tour. And they were always trying to get her to substitute a kind of a popular dance like Diversion of Angels or Appalachian Spring. And Martha absolutely knew the dance worked. I think it works on a level, I mean, watching it now for the first time in years. First I walked in on the kids, dancers. We use the word kids for dances. Is that all right? Still do that? Just seeing them do it, I can't put into words how wonderful it was to see them do it. First of all, they're doing it very well. Yeah. And,
Did Martha give you any notes or any corrections?
do I have notes and corrections?
Did Martha give you when you were learning the dance? Do you remember?
That's a
the
very
process?
good question. I have to think about that. I mean, of course, I was constantly given instruction. As I think, you know, in that year that I joined the company, I've been taking classes with Martha for about 2.5 months. And when she asked me if I wanted, no, he did, her manager said, would you like to go on tour? Martha would like you to go on tour with the company. I assumed it was assistant stage manager or something. And he said, as a dancer, so I quit college instantly. But, I mean, besides the obvious, like Ethel Winter saying, you've got to learn to point your feet. That was, but there were, I don't really remember any corrections. I think she created that dance to work with a dancer like me. Well, the other dancer, Mark Ryder, was more trained, but not a lot more. Bob Cohan, slightly more. So we weren't brilliantly trained dancers. And I think, well, I know now that if it had been any other company on the planet, I wouldn't have become a dancer. It was only because I lucked out. Or maybe I didn't, maybe it's the opposite of that. But I walked into the Graham studio, and to me that was dancing. I'd seen ballet maybe twice, out of the question, you know, all those perfect arabesques and pointed feet.
Do you have anything to say about the Sarabande?
Yes, thank you for asking me.
There's one section in the work for 4 couples you see tonight titled the Sarabande.
The dance was called the Sarabande, and it was a Sarabande. And it was the most serene experience. And nothing could break it. And there's a moment where the woman is on her knees, facing God, I think, and the man kneels down and puts her waist on his shoulder and stands, you know that moment, walks a circle. Well, I had a most beautiful dancer named Ethel Winter, and I picked her up, and as I started to turn, her stomach did one of those the whole time. And it didn't bother me. It was exactly right. It was a dance of 2 bodies. And it was a transcendent moment. The Sarabande was very slow, and yet there were times we would exit sort of fast. The woman would leap up and then we would spin off. But it wasn't an applause getter, and yet it would get applause. I mean, there were surprises in it. Do a slow dance that can surprise you. Very hard. There's one moment where the men are lying on their faces, on their stomachs, and their hands are somehow over their heads, and they lift their feet, and the woman sits on the little platform of the feet. And I would feel, it was like a murmur in the audience, Nobody expects that. What's very difficult to surprise somebody slowly. Surprises usually pop at you from somewhere. Martha succeeded. I think she loved this dance. I know that, you know, she would always insist that it be on a program. And not always, but on tour she had to insist a lot because the agents thought it wasn't going to take, and it always did take. I could talk all night, but this is enough.
I just want to encourage you to tell one last story, the toilet brush.
There's a dance, which, by the way, you saw a little
Yes,
of.
the
But
fetish,
they,
the fetish dance.
the fetish dance, it was called. And the men didn't carry the fetishes, but each had a fetish. And the first year I did it, it's a beautiful little object. One was like a drumstick with horsehairs, three white horsehairs. Mine was a piece of clear plastic that curved up and back and had a black ball, and it would waggle like that. And the third was a, what was it? I can see it, but I can't describe it. It's sort of like a tomahawk, but not shaped like, it was an object. And I'll tell you this story, which I don't know if you know. We were talking about the dance one day, and I said to Mark Ryder, I like my tomahawk better than yours or yours. And Bob Cohan picked up his, no, he was the one who first said it. It's elegant. I like it better than yours. And I said, well, I like mine better. And Mark Ryder said, it's a fetish. You're supposed to like your own better than anybody else. Yeah, well, anyway, the next year, my second year in the company, she had 4 men. Dale Sainert was his name. And she thought, why not put a 4th guy in? So she did, and he learned every dance. And somewhere along the line, I said to Eric, who was kind of like he took care of a lot of details. And I said, we need a fetish for Dale. And he said, well, can't we just get him a dowel, let him rehearse with it, and then we'll get the fetish a little closer to the performance. So I had a dowel about that long, about a ½ inch dowel. And we rehearsed with it. Meanwhile, the stage manager provided for a 4th hole by simply drilling it into the Noguchi piece.
Fetishes get stabbed into a hole.
You stab and leave them there, and they stay for the rest of the dance. And in the books of his art, you see it decorated with 3 fetishes. Well, so now there's a 4th hole, which years later, it's like drilling a hole into some sculpture in Rodin Museum or something. I mean, this fabulous piece, 1 hole just drilled. Well, anyway, it's a week before the performance, and we still didn't have the 4th fetish. And I said to Eric, we don't have a fetish. He says, could you just put something together? So I took a dish brush, a long, skinny dish brush, and I bent it around a disc of plywood. I fastened it somehow, and then I sprayed it black. And that was it. We went on. 45 or so years later, at the Noguchi Museum, there's a, what was it? There is this Noguchi piece with my fetish still in it. I've heard that they did it 2 years ago. It's still there. Well, I think it's now history. It's got to stay there. That's my other story.
Thank you, Stuart. In the years since 1946, the choreography for Dark Meadow has been recognized as among Martha's greatest, especially the partnering and the ensemble work for the men and the women. And we have been looking for a way to showcase that choreography in particular. This music was commissioned in 1942 by the Library of Congress from the Mexican composer Carlos Chavez. And Martha sent him a scenario based on the story of Medea, and he agreed to the project. But Chavez then proceeded to miss deadline after deadline, performance after performance when this was supposed to happen. And when Martha finally did get a few pages of the music, she wrote in frustration, "This music is without stage awareness. It seems to bear no relation to the script we discussed. This is not an impossible situation. I know I can compose a dance counterpoint to the music because I've done so in other cases. It is difficult to do and it requires great concentration." So she sent the Medea script to Samuel Barber, who did a wonderful job on it, and moved on to other projects. So when the complete Chavez score did finally arrive, her usual process was reversed. Rather than creating a script and having the music written for it, she received a score and had to invent to this music. Keep in mind those dance excerpts you saw earlier. These are examples of the choreography that Martha Graham created in counterpoint. The dancers have an internal rhythm that they maintain in places that are quite separate from this very open score.